Welcome to another episode of Penpot Open Chat, a podcast where we discuss open source design and code, or everything in between. And we always have amazing guests with us. And today I'm honored to welcome Dalai Felinto. Dalai Felinto is a product manager at Blender. And we're going to spend the next hour discussing, some cool stuff around how we perceive, as open source design tools. Different aspects of collaboration and design code and whatnot. So thank you very much, Dalai, for accepting this invite. And if you'd like to introduce yourself for those of the audience that perhaps don't still know you, that would be great.
Thanks so much, Pablo, for the invite. Very pleasant to be here. I work at Blender as a product manager. I had a few roles in the past. Mm-hmm. I started as a developer. I'm always familiar with one foot in design and one foot in implementation, working closely with users as much as I could. I used Blender for years, made my living out of using Blender. And then over the years, I worked more as a developer coordinator and coordinating some of the projects, such as the Blender 2.80 viewport. Mm-hmm. But for those who don't even know what Blender is, I think everyone here knows what open source is, and I can see designers coming from Penpot and the web unaware that there's a whole world beyond 2D. It's called 3D. And Blender is a staple a little bit on the open source world, but also in the world at large. And we see more and more how Blender, being an open source 3D DCC, digital content creation, really is making a dent in the world, allowing more people to just create the art, tell the story. That also say that I'm part of this big movement. I'm going to talk a few things about how the project officially sees some of the points we have, but a little bit my own perspective. I work nowadays from the headquarters here in Amsterdam. Mm-hmm. And we have this interesting balance between having a physical building with physical amenities for developers and artists to coexist and collaborate. But also we have this whole community at large, either volunteers or even people within the payroll, but that work remote. So make sure we leverage being in the same place, but also leverage being open and online in the internet. So I think that's a little bit the elevator pitch. It was a long elevator ride.
No, that's great. Actually, it resonates. I love that intro, and it resonates with some of the things we do also at Penpot in terms of Amsterdam becoming Madrid, and then also, the broader spectrum in terms of remote and distributed work and collaboration. You said you had several roles throughout your Blender experience, and I would like for you to share with us during this past, I think, 7 years you've been super actively involved in Blender, one or two aha moments, breakthrough moments that you experienced internally as someone at the core of Blender, things that really struck you in the past 7 years. Because 7 years is kind of, some people think as a generation. I thought that would be an interesting question. What happened in this past Dalai generation at Blender that you would like to share?
I think my first contribution to Blender dates 2008, so that's 16 years already. But the interesting thing that in 7 years ago, when we were debuting the 2.80 project, that was a big milestone in the Blender history in its development. What is considered its second big leap, the first one being for the old ones, 2.4 to 2.5. Yeah. And now we had from 2.7 to 2.80. That was mind blown. First, I thought Blender at large, and maybe my own perspective, which I think is also might add some. Because when people outside look at Blender and its recent growth, a lot of people associate this with the 2.80 success, so the Blender 2.8. And if I remember, in the beginning, we'd always call it 2.8, and then said, we should call it 2.80. So it even internally rebranded because a series, right? It won't be finished on the first release, quite opposite. So I remember all this mental effort, no, 2.80, don't say 2.8. So people see now Blender has Eevee, a real-time renderer in the viewport. It has the whole depth graph that's very technical. Industry compatibility keyboard. So in a way, Blender for years was really targeting what we call professional users. Mm-hmm. And And the premise of Blender is that we're going to make something really good for professionals, and then we're going to give it for free to anyone. So it's not a tool which was meant to be your super accessible tool. You just hit the ground running. But it's more like, hey, imagine if you could get the whole pipeline of a professional studio and have in your bedroom.
Yeah.
And it's one of those classic clashes I see with product versus UX, product versus design. And sometimes because a lot of the premise of design is let's try to have a few personas and let's make everyone happy. And Blender, it's not that Blender tried to be hard for the sake of it. Blender was unique for years and on how it selects objects and its own paradigm. But Blender just had a very specific focus group. And that's something I learned more recently in the product literature. We say, hey, when you are designing a product, when you pick a group, you're actually deciding who you're going to frustrate. It's going to be everyone else. And you got to be bold to do this. And for a lot of people, it doesn't resonate to them. Like, we get sometimes those feedbacks from people say, hey, this change you guys are planning is going to make hard for easy users, for beginners, because of discoverability. It's going to be hard for professional users because of whatever. And it's okay. There's no way you are in the range of from the beginning all the way to a professional. So why don't you tell us your perspective, and so we can see how much that fits within the paradigm. And sometimes it's people that can use Blender just fine. They're reading every latest updates and they know where to find everything. But they have this desire to spread the Blender influence to everyone. And then they're like, oh, but then my neighbor who doesn't really know 3D won't be able to use this. Like, at some point, it's also fair to admit that Blender might not be for everyone. And that's okay. No, I remember talking about Penpot to say, hey guys, when are we going to have whiteboarding? It's like, wow, we don't plan to have whiteboarding. And that's okay. And it's okay. And that's okay. But I'm saying because for me, and all that said, 2.80 made a dent in how Blender is perceived.
Yeah.
We don't really know why Blender became successful. We don't think it was to 2.80 out of the blue. I think it's a mix of factors. People think, no, it's because the UI now is better. Oh, because of industry compatibility. Because it's really not. I think it's a mix of factors. There's some critical mass. Some influencers got wind of Blender. There's some artists who finally made the switch and they have enough influence to create content for more people. There's also the luck factor. We just got lucky and then, one thing leads to the other. So for me, it's one of those aha moments where you see, to this day, we talk to people like, oh, Blender 2.80 really changed everything. And for us, 2.5 was when things changed. And so that's, for me, it was very funny. The other thing is that we, as Blender, we are growing a lot. And we're in that stage where we need to make sure things are more scalable. We had for years, we still have the presence of the founder, Don Rosendale, the CEO. If you talk about the changes from 7 years to now, you see Don was very involved in the almost every day of design or every day of the big picture of design. Yeah. And nowadays, less so. He's focusing more on securing the long-term, the board, an eventual board for the project, and to make sure we have funding, make sure the hires are in place. But that does leave a little bit of a gap between having someone thinking the big picture and having people executing it and being able to do a follow-up. Yeah. So around 2019, so at that time I was still doing developer coordination. And one of the projects we had to be put on hold. That was the particle nodes. It was basically particle system like fireworks, but node-based fireworks. And a developer was working for this already for more than a year. And Tom had this view of a design or how it could be or how it should be in the sense of, hey, if it's not simple, shouldn't do it. And there was a bit of mismatch on what was being presented or delivered and how Tom viewed that. And at some point, Tom, this is a big call, but Tom said, let's put pencils down. Let's put this on hold. Wasn't a problem in the sense that the developers are fantastic and he was able to just pick up a different target and keep working on it, adding a lot of value and all. But for me, in the role of coordinator, if that big of a project is on hold, that's something's wrong and we should do something about it. That main developer is not really working on what he wanted to or what he was supposed to. We should work on that. So at that time was my debut as a product manager. I think it's a role that was a little bit the bridge. We're kind of starting to miss more and more in Blender between a design vision and the people executing it and engineering. And then we convinced Tonto, hey, can we put together a team, which was a kind of new for us to not have those lone wolves developers going a tangent by themselves, but a team that has a designer, has someone representing the user, has someone as a lead developer, someone as a junior developer, someone doing Scrum mastery. So we wanted to try Scrum as well, those buzzwords, and then someone playing the role of product. And for me, it was so interesting because it was the first time to say, okay, so far we have all this roadmap of, for instance, nodes to implement for hair. That was a little bit what was in the agenda, hair, physics, and dynamics. Mm-hmm. And the first thing I tried to do was, let's talk to Andy, the art director here at the studio, and say, Andy, what do you so when you think about particles, what do you expect? What is that makes your eye shine? And he said, no, I just want to do set dressing. Set dressing is when you're basically creating a scene and put your plants here, your rocks here. And there was such for me, speaking about aha moments, for me, like, well, we can go for so long in a direction without feedback, without validation. And we can do something super solid, but yet we can miss the mark for so long and not even be aware of it.
Yeah.
So this was what made us the pivot and do the Jump to Nodes project. For me, was this reminder of, okay, we're no longer a team of 5 developers, how Blender used to be, working with very closely with a studio, making an open film, open movie. Now we're big enough that we do need to be able to make sure in the process we have a way to connect, the artists with what you're doing it and keep iterating and validating until the very end.
Yeah. But let me ask you, I don't know if you use the term, but you're a product manager at Blender. You are very heavily involved in the design of the user interface, the UX, the UI, even just because of your prior experience at Blender and what you do every day. So I would like to know more about your views on the good, the bad, the ugly, in terms of design contributions and that workflow for a tool like Blender.
All right. It's a tricky question because I don't know the right answer yet. Okay. It's a pretty good question nonetheless. Funny thing, I will connect that with your first question. I was already thinking, there's another aha moment I neglected. The first time I was on the payroll for Blender was for a development grant, worked remote to work on game-related functionality. I worked on Photoshop integration. Mm-hmm. I worked on walk navigation, it's the one we still have in Blender. Then I was working on Cycles baking. Cycles, this ray tracer render engine, and people for games, they need to bake those textures down to basically albedo and the other layers. And there was a whole challenge of engineering and the whole challenge of design. And at that time, I was trying to just build a framework and let the community come up with what is a good design that encompass enough workflows. Because for something like baking, and that goes for so many things, the specific workflow you have might be too specific to your studio. So it's really hard to nail down at first what is the one design that is going to frustrate the least amount of people.
I love that.
So we built AUI and AAPI, but at that point, my contract was also interrupted, was the dev grant. Mm-hmm. And then we're left in this limbo where to this day, we have a solution that could have been much better. And to this day, because we don't have many ways for people to contribute designing to Blender, people just went their own way to create their own solutions and to commercialize that. So shortly after we had the baking system, and because everything that was in the baking system was also exposed in the Python API. People were able to create on day one a whole solution for people to bake and then sell it on a third-party store. And I had this thing, like, because I have nothing against people making a living with Blender and find ways to create custom tools. But what is missing for people to connect, their ideas and the way and what they can contribute to design and workflow into the core of Blender? So, and I'm talking about 2014. So 10 years that's been bugging me.
You still have some nightmares right now.
And the one takeaway I always get from that is that it doesn't matter how we might trust the word to come up with a nice design and solution. Let's make sure the first design we deliver is solid. And is a bold statement. And maybe because of my background within Blender was development, I was more shy on say, hey, this is a design that I trust, that I can get behind. It can get better, but let's not just delegate this part of the process. Because for me, design is as core a part of development as it is the code itself you're writing. And for me, this was more like, hey, it's like almost outsourcing, right? And let's do the core feature and all the entry points in the API and wait for people to bring up design back into the solution. So throughout those 10 years, I've been thinking about that. One thing I noticed is we have a lot of process for software development, for code. The moment at Blender, the moment we introduced code review was really a leap when it comes to what we can collaborate and the quality we can secure, and of course unit tests and whatnot. We have people fighting, like really passionate about code standards and should enums be capitalized or lowercase or camel case, should use tabs or spaces. I see nowhere that passion when it comes to design within the contributors. It's not that design is seen as an afterthought. I see that a lot of people respond super well to quality design. They just don't have the language or the tools to even come to the discussion on the same level. And I'm not talking about the ability, I'm not talking about artistic sensibility, but I'm talking about the gap is a bit bigger than for software development because of the culture I think we have in the open source world at large, definitely at Blender, that they don't even know what they're missing. And one of the things we're trying to clarify now is the difference between an idea, a concept, a design. Ideas, you can have an idea, but that might not pan out. Even if you have an idea, can you frame a little bit what is the audience for this? What does that change your workflow? And how you take the idea and then try to understand what's their problem and then try to come up with a solution with them. That's not necessarily their idea. Concept will be something in between. But if you really have a designer to contribute, and if you're contributing a whole new feature, it's not just not just a UI or a UX. It's the whole conceptual concept you have. How does this affect every other part of Blender? So we know how Blender is this mix, this Swiss army of a pipeline. And if you're doing something for 2D animation, I want layered grease pencil. Grease pencil is this 2D animation we have in Blender. Okay, that's fantastic, but don't you think that modelers also want layered meshes? Don't you think that people doing sculpting also want layered whatever data they have? And how can we take this and make an overarching design for the whole software? How can we, which thesis we are working with here? How can we validate them? I mentioned how little we do in terms of metrics. And it's so different to work in a software like Blender than to work in something like I'd say Amazon. Not say Amazon is simple, I never worked there, but
I know.
They're a classic product or UX problem. There's a lot of product, like how do you maximize revenue? How do you maximize user retention? How do you, with the least amount of clicks, get something delivered to your house? But Blender is one of those softwares that you expect to have a non-linear pipeline, non-linear workflow. You're doing some sculpting, you go back to modeling, you go back to painting, you go to sculpting, you go see your angles, set your cameras, try the lighting, go back to modeling. Oh, for this setup, texture needs more resolution, or the texture is influencing with the final result, and let's change that. So the problems we're trying to solve are not alpha maximization, I believe.
Yeah.
Are more of this integration and what are the general concepts that you can apply to every part of the pipeline and they all click the same way. Blender is famous for its GSR, the grab, scale, and rotation. Grab just moving around. And this is the kind of thing that works everywhere. It works on the node editor, it works on the 3D view. It doesn't work for rendering, but it could, I guess. And in that sense, you're like, you really want to make sure that when people, even if you leave the developers aside for a bit, the people writing code, but thinking about the larger use base. You mentioned, some companies have a 2-to-1 developer to artist ratio, 10-to-1 traditionally. In Blender, I feel it's almost the other way around how people perceive it, because we have few developers working a feature and then have 100 people with very strong opinions about how they should go about it. And I think it's important even for those people to understand if they want to contribute in the design level, how can they really give this kind of feedback? How we can leverage that amount of people. I think this I even mentioned on Penpot Fest last year.
Yeah.
Like we try to have this really, really focused feedback threads for any of the new features. And really, hey, tell me what's the problem, how you're trying to use the tool, share the art. We love to see art. Seeing just people complaining, it doesn't bring joy to anyone. Tell us what you try to do and which kind of showstoppers you run into. And now, yes, which ideas you might have that to overcome these showstoppers and how that make your life better, what would that give you? So even try to frame their contributions in a way that is more digestible and actionable goes a long way. But it's very hard though. Like so many people are, you talked about the tribing. So many people they feel like Blender is part of their life, and Blender means a lot to them. It means a lot to the world. However, funny enough, they might get on the way of development sometimes, and I never want those people not to use Blender. That never crossed my mind at all. I think Blender is a gift to everyone. It was a gift to my life, and it's a gift that I'm glad to keep giving it to people, help make it nicer. But I feel sometimes like an X-Men. Now I'm back into reading hardcore comics, and it's like X-Men is those group of people who are really injustice. People hate them, and they do it nonetheless. They help the humanity nonetheless, because the humans don't know better. It's what option do they have? If you really love the software and you have your opinion there, you want to express your passion in a way. And somehow we need, sometimes you might have to almost read into the lines for your own good. What you want is maybe something else. So I'm trying to build those tools so we can say, hey, this is constructive, but can you maybe go to a Penpot template you might have one day and try to work some mockups or explain what are you as a... I even don't like the word persona much.
Yeah.
I know how persona is used, so you're not really talking about someone specifically, but more this umbrella. But somehow I love, like, one day we'll have a talk called Persons, Not Personas, because it goes a long way to have this one person that really understand the problem and you can really have a back and forth with them, as opposed to this generic, because if it's generic, everyone has a... Anyhow, I think I'm going on a tangent here. What was the question again?
No, love that. Again, so many reactions, and actually, we invite the people watching this podcast to comment on the things we're saying. It's also true that you're probably building one of the most challenging tools. It's very complex. The workflows, the audience, very very diverse. It's a builder's tool. It's a creator's tool. So there we can see that there are inherent problems and challenges that many of the tools don't face. So I think to be fair with Blender and tools like Blender, I think we belong to that same category. You had to confront these challenges with little help from the outside world. Like it's like there are no templates out there, right, for a tool like Blender. Okay, let's move on. What is your second question, Dalai?
I've promised to speak faster because I know I can go on. It's about the team size. I know at Blender we're at this moment where we're still growing it. The revenue is paying the bills, but we might need to get a bit bigger, but we constantly don't want to go too big. But how about you guys? Like, I know you have a team which is already building software, you know how to do it. I wonder how much, and I know you guys are hiring every now and then. I see you posting about software developers.
True.
How do you see the Penpot team growing? Is there pressure from the investors to, get big quicker, so you can get a big bang quicker, so you can be profitable quicker? And do you think it changes much your dynamic of the open source community now or after you grow? I even know you guys have a separate tracker, for instance, for your internal issues and where people can report a bug. Do you think that's scalable? Do you see a moment where maybe the whole communication of the project is in the open, just because you're going to have way more developers and contributors than the community, that's still going to be fine to keep the quality on check, or you see this boundary happening? Yeah.
Well, many questions there. So I'll try to kind of merge them into one answer. We don't have this pressure to be big, just because it is there. People think there's a correlation between being big, fast, big as a team, and delivering more and being tremendously successful or anything like that. No, I think when we chose our investors, the one in Spain, Atos, and the one in the US, Decibel, we made sure that they would understand open source. They would believe in open source, not just understand it, but actually appreciate it. And also understand that it's not about size of the team, it's about how you execute your vision. And there is like no need to be big for the sake of being big. What needs to be big is the project or the product. That has to be big, but there are many ways to achieve that. So in that sense, we are 37 people. Like for a tool like Penpot to be able to build that and not all of them, of course, are in building the product. Everyone builds a product in a way, but a third of those we are in the community team. So it's about community contributions, communication, marketing, Penpot Fest, things like that, right? So I think we are very cautious about the usual mistakes in many teams, where there's this belief that you need to become as big as possible to be able to execute and deliver as fast as possible. I think we tend to be more like looking at the strategy, what we want to build, and decide what things need to be developed by the core team, because it is important to have this very clear vision. Like you were discussing this earlier on, contributions and design. So there are things that can not be negotiated with with anyone. And those we take into the core. But then as an open source company, we do believe in partnerships and collaboration with people outside. And we have many of those. Like the things that people might not know, but there are a lot of things that we're building that are actually being built by other companies, other external contributors. Like for instance, the Figma exporter plugin that is not being built by us, or the native support for design tokens that is being built by Token Studio. So in a way, what we're very smart at, I think, is using the financial resources that we have to channel them in a way that actually delivers what people want, and we build a product, but not necessarily is translated into hiring people like crazy. And I think if you do that the right way and you create a healthy ecosystem right from the beginning, then it pays off. I think it will. I've been in open source since 1997. I've seen it all. I've seen nice success stories and then terrible ones, right? So, but I strongly believe that if you have this long-term vision and you invest in what you want it to become, eventually you might get there. So no pressure at all to becoming big. I don't know. I mean, 37 doesn't look like a lot of people to me. And then we have a kind of a goal that we want to see, that is to have a ratio between external contributors to internal, like to employees, of a 4-to-1. So 4 times as many external contributors, like regular contributors. I wouldn't say that they're full-time contributors, but like regular contributors, 4-to-1, to be able to tell ourselves the story that, okay, there's evidence that this is going beyond, this, we have tailwind, we have momentum, the community is there, it's really there. So far we don't have 4-to-1. I think so far we have 1-to-1. So we have as many contributors out there on a regular basis as internal developers. Now, this is for the product, for designing the product and for building the product. But then we have many other contributions that we are going to release the plugin system. Would a plugin be considered a contribution? Plugin, right? Or templates and libraries and tutorials. And so if you take into account those, then perhaps we will be closer to 4-to-1 in a year. But yeah, so we are very careful not to grow fast. What really motivates us is to execute fast. I think we do feel that we are in a race. We do feel that the stakes are higher than ever, and that it's also a matter of how fast we can execute our vision. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we need to be twice the size of the team that we are now. I don't know. Did that answer your question? I hope so.
Yeah. I just wonder. I'm impressed about already you guys reaching a 1-to-1 in contributors and internal development team. From these contributors, I believe they're mostly developers right now, like coders. Or do I already have a way to integrate design contributions that are implemented by the core team?
So code contributions are the easiest to have, and then design contributions we do more on a open call every few months. The product team shares the need for people to contribute. We are going to release something big. We want particularly design contributions, design, UX and UI ideas to come. And we postpone. We are happy to postpone the launch of like something big, like was last year Flex Layout, and this year's CSS Grid Layout. And now we have the plugin system early access program. The plugin system is actually quite mature, but we want to make sure that we have the best developer experience. So we are, again, opening up that for people. And every time we have opened this, and normally this is for the design aspects, for the experience of them. But every time we've done that, we got not only amazing feedback, but also it made us go bolder. Like people would say, "This is fine, but you could actually do this. Why are not doing this? You're halfway there already. Just be more opinionated about this." And we take all that feedback very seriously. And some of the things that people recognize Penpot to be like a thought leader actually came in a way through those moments of feedback, with these open calls for design contributions. So it is less about a design contribution going all the way from an external person to the company to the code itself. It's less of that. I think we are happy not necessarily having that in place, but it's about the conversation and how we structure that so that we have net contributions that are easily implemented then by the team. So, but ideally for me, what we would like to see at some point is design contributions also going almost flawlessly and seamlessly through the whole pipeline. And we share everything. We don't have any internal reporting system, or we don't have that. You have our GitHub repository, and you have a Taiga project. Taiga is another project that we build, another product. So you can now go to tree.taiga.io and look for the Penpot project, and you can see what we are building today, who is doing what at the task level. So we have the sprint, everything is open, you can see the user stories and you can see the tasks. So that a lot of people are amazed that we are so transparent. Like you can actually predict what the next release is going to be just by looking at our project management what we do. So, and then you have GitHub, because for a lot of people it's just easy to have a GitHub account and report bugs or enhancement requests there. But everything goes to our Tiger project. So you can follow us very closely, see our backlog, and informed by that, reach to us and discuss things that you see there. Actually, some people are quoting user stories and tasks right away, saying, "I know there are these people are actually working on this because I can see it's already ready to develop." So it's going to be So people get excited also through those sneak peeks.
That's super nice. I'm definitely going to check it out, how you're structuring your call for design collaboration.
Typically that happens on the community space. So community.penpot.app, we do that. And well, you can actually participate if you want for the plugin system, and you can experience it yourself. Even if you don't end up developing a plugin, you could see how the process is managed. And it's about not building plugins, but actually giving feedback to the plugin system.
No, I love it because, as I said, we try to also get feedback, and the way you make it sound, they might even ask for feedback earlier or as early as possible. And I love that the community from Penpot is heavily design inclined. I wonder how much that pans out on the people being involved. I'll definitely check it out. It's great to hear. I do have another question for you. You mentioned how transparent you are, and at Blender we also strive to be transparent. And we are very proud to be collaborative, and we really also take feedback to the heart. And we're just developing extensions, the whole extension system in Blender. And it's so nice to have this open alpha and beta development period where people really bring us use cases we haven't thought of or we haven't prioritized, didn't realize was that important. I love to see those changes. But do you really think that's that different from a regular company? Because I think sometimes at open source, we are the best sense of the moral. We are like making things really to the user. But I see so many companies, let's say Baldur's Gate, done by Lara. They had a whole open beta period. I know have a few diehard Baldur's Gate fans here in the office. And they really played the first act already on the beta, giving feedback, following the development. And I'm pretty sure I see other companies in the design space, they have those big conferences telling what they do. I know a lot of companies, they have a close relation with, like on the DCC space, with key players, key studios, and they try to, almost like a direct connection. Hey, whatever you have, if ILM has a problem with whatever Autodesk software, I'm pretty sure they have a direct call to that. And I don't even mean, as a support channel. I just mean like people building DCCs, building tools, they care about people using them. And that's not unique to open source, right?
Yeah.
So I do wonder if what we could learn from open source, from how people, the rest of the world, and if there's still something unique about it. Comment on it.
I think that's a great question, and I've evolved. My ideas, I think, have evolved a bit in how intrinsically different open source projects are to other projects in the sense of that collaboration and those contributions. I still believe, though, that even if you can have terrible open source project collaboration models and amazing proprietary software collaboration schemes, you can have. I think fundamentally open source has one key advantage. It's existential advantage, which is the ownership. So I admire really when proprietary software companies reach out, really honestly believe they have to reach out and involve the community into building, whether it's more in the periphery, like plugins and some content, or whether it's actually impacting the core at some point. I mean, that is difficult for them to actually get into the core IP, right? But as much as you can get, I really admire that, because when we look at those companies, we see we share some values of co-creating the products and making sure that it's the center of gravity of who's making the decisions is not like in this one headquarters building. It's in a way it's a bit outside. And then also we have examples of open source projects that neglect completely contributions. That they say they're open, they have these open source licenses, but the way they operate and they govern their project look more or less a traditional old regime proprietary company. Like nothing really stands out. It's just that they have an open source license. So I've seen it all, and so I come to this with perhaps open mind and want to see like the devil is in the details, I guess. One thing is to co-create and then co-own, and the fact that you are contributing to an open source project and you can see your ideas be then part of a bigger good, okay, to know that there is a I guarantee, let's say, I guarantee that what you are giving away as a contribution is for everyone to enjoy forever, like fundamentally, right? That that you can trust the future. And I think that sets apart, open source from proprietary software. And I think that is a trust issue at the very core. A trust in you coming to this dilemma on where to spend your time and your money, and deciding that it's so much different to feel part and to feel this belonging to a community with a proprietary software vendor than is to go for something that is from the very beginning generous with the whole IP and technology, that even in the worst case scenario, everyone in the world will still benefit from what you build. And even if it's through a fork or through just, using that code that was left abandoned there. So I think that is, in many ways, for me, the feeling that you also own, that you are also co-authoring. Then you're not just contributing to an idea, but it's also your idea, and you are part of that idea. That transcends, in a way, differently how the collaboration is felt. I don't know. That's how some people approach contributing to Penpot. I think that they feel it's more than just a builder's tool or developer's tool, the designer tool. It's also about them belonging to something that just is for everyone, and there is this commitment to a shared ownership. So an open source license won't be enough for me. I need to see how you're governing the product. I need to see how many contributors, external contributors you have. I need to see how you are making the decisions. I need to see how much as a user base you have, how many different use cases you are approaching, to be able to see which open source projects are really excelling in all that. And it's not just users and license, it's more than that. Because then you might surprisingly find that some open source projects are doing far worse than some proprietary software tools out there. I mean, it's you can see there's a gray area there in some points.
In the Hollywood space, a big industry, big studios, there's a lot of cases for open source, as in take the code, throw over the wall, so we don't need to maintain it anymore. So it's a standard.
Oh yeah.
As opposed to build something together. The one thing I was reading recently about is this concept of IKEA business model. And one of the values you get out of IKEA, of Lego, that you're building to yourself.
Yeah.
And I remember like when I first did my first 3D print was some little crates and helmets for a Star Wars board game. And I used to hate those little lines that you get from extruded 3D printing, like it's so ugly, make them smooth, put some acetone. When I printed my own, which I had modeled in Blender, it's so beautiful. Like every little defect adds to the experience. And I think open source has this and that can be taken for granted for sure. I think anyone that comes to use a tool that they help to build, you get used to the little shortcomings and a little bit of the, how things might be a bit different. But as you said, the ownership is so big that makes the process and a creation process more, author, more important, more pleasant.
Totally. And actually, I have a post on the community space on Penpot. So again, community.penpot.app. And I think it's about communities with a capital C. And we want a community with a capital C because everyone these days says, they're building a community, you're part of the community. And I think typically proprietary software vendors do approach the community because there's a lot of energy there. But that's lowercase c in the sense that they are extracting a lot of value. When the return of investment, in a way, which you speak like very, very shitty way, you're giving away your time and you're contributing to someone that then needs to make sure that you stay in the loop to monetize you somehow. We believe in communities with a capital C where you actually have a say in all that too. And I think open source at least opens the door, wide opens the door to make sure that you have a say and you have some power, not just helping this entity, but actually helping yourself at the same time. But you have to do that right. You can make many mistakes, and we have seen many mistakes along the way for open source companies that believing that it was in everyone's interest, even in their community's interest, to change some rules of the game or to move the product feature-wise in a different direction, and then feeling that conflict of interest with their community, right? I could do a podcast just on the conflict of interest in monetization around open source and how we see that at Penpot. But that's one of the, at least you have that opportunity when you're doing open source, that you have more opportunities to address that. But anyway, we are running out of time. Like in no open chat went through, I think, the 1 hour mark. So we are already setting a new record here. So can I ask my third question? Speaking of plugin system, we are about to launch the plugin system. It's already there, but we want to have this program for builders to try it out and then tell us what works, what doesn't work. So people will say, this is I having delight. I'm experiencing delight, while I'm developing a plugin for Penpot. And even the plugin MVP. But of course, Blender is famous for the sheer amount of plugins out there. And you have shared with me in the past that there were some lessons learned about how Blender managed, the plugin world, how you approach that, and things that you would have changed now that you have perspective, and how to make that just a successful joy for everyone. Please tell us.
Let me ask a quick question first. For the Penpot, is the plugin system also a marketplace, or is it unrelated?
We have plans for a marketplace, but so far it's just a plugin framework to allow people to develop their own stuff and be able to run it themselves. But yes, of course, the moment we have, I don't know, hundreds of those plugins, wouldn't it be cool to have a place where people could find them, rate them, test them, easily one click, deploy them on their Penpot instances or on Penpot SaaS. And that typically gets the name of marketplace.
All right. So I'm asking, because Blender is in an interesting moment now where we are releasing a new, we call the extensions platform, new ways for people to make plugins for Blender. And that's the one lesson going back, and that's the one lesson we try to tell every open source project we talk when it comes to the plugin system. And we have, I know Godot is also, playing with this idea of, having a place for plugins, and Penpot. And that's so Blender at its core, in its mission, is Blender should be self-sufficient. You don't need plugins for that.
Okay.
Also, you don't need to pay anything to have the best of your experience. That is where the water got a bit murky, because originally the idea for the plugins for Blender was, if you have a very specific workflow pipeline, you really need a tool to make these very specific attributes for a game engine. No, that doesn't belong to the world. That's something you need.
Yeah.
And it evolved as almost like a gateway for people to experiment with Blender ideas and UIs and interactions. In that sense, I think the same way, I think Penpot is going for a JavaScript-based plugin system, which is more accessible than the Clojure. Blender has a Python-based plugin system, which is way more approachable to a lot of people than C and C++, right? So in a way that catered to a different audience that could contribute to the core of Blender. And one thing we didn't do well from the beginning is to, and I don't know if we had control over that, but there's a famous third-party store called Blender Market. For a lot of people, it's very confusing. Like, why is a Blender Market? And they think it's associated to the Blender Foundation project, and they think they're supporting the Blender mission by buying plugins. And sure, some of the plugins, they have revert part of the revenue to Blender, but it's not clear, and it should have been clear from day one to everyone involved. So that's the one big lesson we learned, is that from day one, they should have make it very clear that, hey, this is their separation. Also, we have been asking for people, if they want to contribute to Blender, you do it individually. If I make a plugin and have some money making that, you individually contribute to Blender and not through this whole umbrella of this market, because also it's very ambiguous right now. If you go to a different creators, which might contribute differently, however, the sign is the same. The signal is the same. Like, hey, I'm contributing to the Blender project, but to which amount? Or
good point.
So that's also very ambiguous. So like, hey, if you want to support the Blender project, do it directly, and then you can claim whatever your level of support. But you don't use the support in the Blender mission as a way to endorse your product. Those things should be separate. So because the market itself took care of having, places for people to publish add-ons, we didn't prioritize. We didn't imagine the plugin system would be that big, right, in Blender. I didn't speak for myself here. Because only now we say, what, that's nice that people can make a living creating custom solutions. I personally am very happy with custom solutions. I'm always a bit on the fence when I see something that could have been a core contribution to Blender. Because my question is always why you're not contributing to the greater good. You're building something on top of such a big donation from so many people for so many years. You're adding on top of that. Very valuable contribution, but you should acknowledge that, then there's a gift to the world, and the moment you take that gift and wrap it, you're breaking the generosity cycle. It's a concept some people have in the open source world. Like, it's not illegal, not immoral, but you're breaking, the generosity cycle a little bit. And there are different ways of making a living while still providing support and value to a lot of people without jeopardizing this whole dynamic. A big point is that we never had a way for people that honestly want to contribute to the open source project with plugins to do so. We would bundle plugins in Blender ever since we got the add-on system in Blender, and we would ship Blender with 100 plugins until the latest version, 4.1. But people don't understand that the level of maintenance of those plugins are very low. And at some point we had stopped accepting new plugins unless they're from really core contributors, because it's such a hard call to make from the core team and the hydrants of maintaining more and more little parts of the software. That we're finally addressing is, what? Why don't we provide a whole platform for free and open source add-ons and themes? So extensions for Blender, and let people find out there's just so many people that are willing to contribute to the open source mission and just haven't had a place to do it. And sure, they can still have the third-party markets and stores, but we do believe we haven't even given a fair chance to the open source dynamic. Maybe that's me. I still don't think there was an unfair competition in terms of investment of infrastructure and ease of use and ease of finding it and updates compared to what the market was providing. So we're really making sure the best experience you have is from a core integration in Blender, if you convert your add-on to an extension. That way you can have automatic updates within Blender. That was a big problem people had. People would get plugins from GitHubs and websites, and there was no way to know when things are updated or not. So I wanted to make this experience core and more polished. And also even for people using commercial plugins to be able to, we can still integrate to the core system of Blender. We're not jeopardizing the commercial side of the plugin market business. And quite opposite, we really support authentication, things we don't care to our own open source platform. And by the way, Pablo, the whole extensions project is a website, but also the code we're using for that is all open source. We was inspired a soft fork from Firefox extensions. And we're encouraging other open source projects to take a look. Maybe it's something you could use yourself and forward because it's all Django based and all.
Okay, that's technology very dear to us.
And yeah, I think that's so.
Okay.
The one thing I wonder looking back is, and it goes back to the topic of design, is why are people, every time I see a very flash out add-on, a plugin for Blender, I'm like, why is it that the person find it approachable to create and put time into that development, but don't make that leap to contribute to Blender? Is it a monetary angle? Is this just there's a barrier of entrance? And this is something that I'm really curious to
well, you can start by asking, but I think that's a great feedback. We might actually do just that. We don't see a problem with asking people stuff like, and it's fine if we don't have everyone replying to those questions. But I think the same way we believe that a contribution starts by simply saying hi. We also believe that a relationship can start with understanding. It's just asking questions. Why are you building this plugin this way? Or I mean, we have to put some potential answers already there, but then leave it open for people to say, oh, I'm just exploring a commercial career for me doing this, or I'm just exploring some I don't know, some assignment at university, or just to understand that a bit. But we will definitely take a look at your technology and at the very minimum be inspired by that, but perhaps potentially even use it. I mean, that would be great.
I would love if more people get the benefit from that, of course.
Yeah.
But I'm also curious. So we are launching this. It's in beta right now. Extensions.blender.org.
Okay.
And is officially coming out of beta together with the Blender 4.2 release, which is now happening at some point in July. For me, the moment the extension platform has more add-ons, which people are using it, than what we're bundling with Blender, for me that means it was a success.
Okay. You have a very, very specific metric there. that's good.
So I really want to see. I'm really curious to see how the community receives that and how much of an impact this has in the whole open source ecosystem for us.
Well, this was wonderful. That I took so much pleasure in having you on this open chat. Thank you a lot for being here, for spending quite some quality time this morning.
Pablo, thanks so much for the space here. Thanks to everyone for listening that long. Yeah, and I'm a big fan of what Penpot is doing. I love the decisions you make, and yeah. So thanks the whole team, thanks the whole community. Thanks for being here. Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.